Hi everybody, let's get going. Since this is a topic near and dear to everybody's hearts and nobody trusts the government, electronic voting is definitely something I know everybody's going to enjoy talking about today. And of course it's a great pleasure to introduce a large number of colleagues that work with David. I don't know some of them actually. And I know that everybody in the room would enjoy getting their teeth stuck into this. So David's going to talk for about 40 minutes I think, and then there's going to be plenty of room for discussion. And ahead of time, as always, we welcome our speakers with a little applause. Please enjoy the food at the back, courtesy of CITRIS. And it's nice to see everybody. So, David, I'll let you run, and please, enjoy questions as we fly, and let's look forward to a really interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Yeah, and please feel free to make this informal. You don't have to wait till the end of the talk to jump in. It's a fun topic. So.
Do we vote on that first? Or?
We can have a vote and then a recount.
Okay.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, my background is in computer security. And recently I've gotten interested in the topic of e-voting, which is real fascinating from the computer security point of view. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the research that my group is doing. But I also wanted, since this is such a fun topic, to give you some of the background, give you some of the context for some of the developments over the past few years that have come into the public eye, so that you can see some of where this is coming from. So historically, looking back on the history of elections, I've been reading about the history of elections. Historically, elections have been, it's only very recent that computers and computer security has played an important role in elections. One of the motivations for studying this from a computer science point of view is that we've had a big growth over the past decade or two in the use of automation, computers, and software in elections. So for instance, to give you some statistics, the use of touchscreen voting machines, which we here in Alameda County, if you've voted here in Alameda County in the past few years, you've used a touchscreen voting machine. They've roughly doubled over the past 5 years alone. So there's been a big growth in the deployment of those.
Is that U.S.-wide or just
that's
Alameda?
U.S.-wide.
U.S.-wide.
U.S.-wide. These machines are usually adopted on a county-by-county basis. And virtually every jurisdiction in the U.S. actually is using some form of automation or computing computers somewhere in the process. Even if whether or not you as a voter actually see it in the polling place, there's a lot of automation behind the scenes. So let me mention, I want to talk about the computer security issues associated with elections. And there are a number of requirements elections have. In the security world, one of the obvious requirements is that the election has to give you the right outcome. You want to know who the winner is, you want to get that winner correctly, and you don't want anyone to be able to manipulate or subvert the election outcome. So there's an integrity requirement. But what's maybe a little less obvious is that it's not enough just to determine the winner and to do it right. You have to be able to convince the losers that they lost fair and square. Because one of the goals of an election is to not have rioting in the street, to have a peaceful transfer of power. And so that's a very strong transparency requirement here. It's not enough to get the right answer. You have to be able to convince everyone, even skeptics, that the answer was correct. There's also one of the other things that makes elections very challenging from a security point of view is that there's a strong privacy requirement. The voters have to be able to vote anonymously and in privacy so that no one knows how they voted. And it's not just that my vote has to be protected. That's certainly true. I don't want no one should be able to learn how I voted unless I want them to know. But it goes beyond that. We have a requirement for a secret ballot, which is that even if I want to disclose how I voted, I shouldn't be able to prove that. And this comes because of historical issues with voter coercion and vote buying. If I can prove to you how I voted, I can sell my vote. If I can prove to you how I voted, I can be coerced. You can tell me, vote such and such a way or I'll bash your kneecaps. So it's a security requirement that I must not, even if I want to, be able to prove how I voted. And the election technology has to provide these security requirements. So some of these are not quite so obvious. So let me take you a little bit through some of the history of voting and e-voting. The biggest technological breakthrough in elections was, I think it was in the 1870s, the development of the Australian secret ballot, first used in Australia, hence the name. Before this, elections, there have been many kinds of elections that have been used. One very common method was essentially a public show of hands, where everyone would say publicly, here's my name and here's who I'm voting for. That obviously didn't provide the privacy and the privacy requirements. There have been other elections where you took a slip of paper and you wrote down how you wanted to vote for. That turned out to have a number of issues with voter coercion. And the Australian secret ballot is so familiar today that we don't think of it as a breakthrough, but it was at the time. The idea is very simple. The government prints a standard ballot. You put a check next to the name of the folks that you want to vote for. The ballot is anonymous, so that preserves the privacy requirements. In fact, you're not allowed to mark or put your name on the ballot in any way. Many states have laws that say that if you have put an identifying mark on the ballot, you've written your name on the ballot, and the ballot will not be counted. And by using a standardized ballot, the government is able to ensure the integrity of the ballots. And by using various procedural methods, counting and receiving ballots in public, allowing observers to observe the whole process, to verify the ballot box is empty at the start of the election, to watch the transporting of the election, to observe the counting of the election, you can give the public confidence that these have been counted correctly. Okay, so this is the standard, very simple paper ballot scheme, and it provides in some ways the gold standard for the kinds of election goals we're trying to achieve with more sophisticated technology. The main problem with this paper ballot approach is that it doesn't scale very well. And so we'd like to have a lot better automation. So, okay, zoom way forward to the future, we get to punch card ballots, which were notorious for many problems and became especially notorious in the 2000 election. The 2000 election was just an absolute bombshell for the elections community. First, because of the huge amount of public attention, which second illuminated a number of long-standing issues. And I'm sure you've all seen the butterfly ballot. I'm sure you also followed all of the recounts and all of the disputes, which really brought a lot of this into the public eye. And one of the things that this led to was a federal movement for reform. It led to the HAVA Act, Help America Vote Act, in which the federal government mandated replacement of outdated voting technology, like punch card ballots. Boy, that was a very good thing. Mandated the deployment of voting equipment that could be used, that was accessible to voters with disabilities or various kinds of impairments. Provided a huge amount of federal funding to replace and upgrade the election equipment to meet these mandates. Instead of deadline, well, effectively the deadline was January 1st, a month and a half ago, and it's not a deadline. But this caused some sweeping change in the election landscape, and one of the effects of that was to further drive the adoption of computerized voting technology. And here I want to show you some examples. One of the voting technologies on a big upswing since 2000, since the HAVA Act, is the use of DRE machines, touchscreen voting machines. Touchscreen voting machines, basically a computer. It's got a touchscreen interface, like a kiosk, or some of them are like ATM machines. You go to the polling place, you select who you want to vote for, this nice graphical user interface. The computer records who you want to vote for, and is stored on some storage device, which is later transported to county headquarters to be tallied. One of the advantages of these touchscreen machines is they can provide accessibility. You can plug headphones in to have an audio interface for the blind or those with vision impairments. You can make these You can provide other interface technology for those with mobility impairments or other kinds of limitations that would make it hard to vote on a paper. So this is a Diebold touchscreen machine, TS machine. You may have seen this if you voted here in Alameda County. This was what Alameda County has owned for a couple of years. It's used in the past few elections. Here's a touchscreen machine that's made by Sequoia. Here's a touchscreen machine that's made by ES&S. Those are the three major players in this market. Those are the three major vendors. Here's just to give you a sense for how these look if you've never voted on the DRE before. Here's a welcome screen on the left. On the right is the user interface you see when you're voting on this. There's a list of candidates. You just press the candidate name and it lights up. The check mark appears there. You go through a set of screens on touchscreen. How many voted on one of these DRE touchscreen machines? Okay, cool. Those are probably pretty familiar. After you voted made all your selections and all the contests, it will show you a summary screen, show you here's who you selected. Please confirm whether or not this is indeed what you wanted. So this is a second chance here. If you failed to vote in any contest that you wanted to, or if you didn't select the one you wanted to, this is a chance to double check. And then you cast your ballot. Okay, so this brings in a whole bunch of computer security questions here. And one of the questions we can ask is, how do those election security requirements that I showed you earlier, how do they apply to these touchscreen machines, the DRE machines? Well, if we look at integrity, that imposes a number of integrity requirements on the software and the hardware that's running on these DREs. Of course, the machine is charged with preventing double voting. The machine has to record the votes in a way so they can't be tampered with once they've been cast. If we look at this from a transparency point of view, then this imposes a requirement that the machine has to be not only trustworthy, but it has to be possible for skeptics and third parties and candidates and voters to be able to verify that the machine is meeting all of these goals. That the machine is indeed worthy of the voters' trust. This actually turns out to be a really hard one. Because think about this as a voter. How do you know whether your vote was recorded correctly? You're not Superman. You don't have X-ray vision. You can't, see the bits that were recorded on that storage device. And so for all you know, if the machine had some malicious code or if it's gone haywire, it might have shown you one thing on the touchscreen and recorded another.
Wasn't this also an issue with one of the suppliers that they didn't want to reveal their code?
One of the suppliers, in fact, none of the suppliers, none of the major suppliers will reveal their code.
Well,
The code's all proprietary.
Barbara Simpson's big push. Barbara Simpson.
Barbara Simons, yes.
Simons, yeah.
Yes, so this has spurred, exactly this transparency issue has spurred a major controversy about the role and the appropriateness of DRE machines in the elections process because of these transparencies.
The code can be verified. And since the code was never released, so she urged basically to ignore all these voting machines.
That's right, that's right.
I think we should also question whether it's even appropriate for private entities to develop voting equipment.
That's another concern that's been raised. Another concern that's been raised is that this has led to more and more involvement of private vendors in the conduct of elections. So one of the things that these machines do is that they perform some of the procedures that were previously performed by humans are now performed by the computer, and that's being automated and stuck inside the box.
Actually, coming all the way back to the Australian ballot,
Yes.
and this sounds such an obvious question, what was almost the same way to stop somebody during the process changing a check mark from one place to another?
The only thing that was changing that, nothing particularly technological, was oversight observers.
Okay.
So the key thing was that the ballot box was sitting right there in public view,
Okay.
and we would have procedural controls that involved maybe you would have multiple poll workers from different parties with competing interests all watching that ballot box, so that it's unlikely that they'll all collude to...
And they weren't picking up on the last thread of the conversation, they weren't from a private organization?
Not from a private organization.
Okay.
And I guess that's a key difference because we had, macroscopic things that somebody could actually watch by walking along and see the urn is being carried and nobody has to hand in there. But by the time you can hook a cable into a box that you cannot look inside, that you cannot look at the code, what the hell's going on in there? I mean, no way that an observer from the outside can verify anything. Right? It's just totally unbelievable.
But let's just note, there was not a golden age of no fraud when we had paper ballots.
Right.
There was lots of fraud with paper ballots. The golden age did not exist.
And I doubt we've ever had a perfect election. And with paper ballots, there have been terrible abuses. And the procedural requirements to make paper ballots secure are significant. Those are very burdensome. You have to have a lot of people watching very carefully.
Very costly in both.
It's costly.
David, I don't understand I thought your secrecy requirement was that there wasn't the ability to prove the content of the vote, not that one had voted.
It's fine. It would be fine. Yeah. So what's going on here? It would be fine for a machine to give you proof that you voted.
Well, that seems desirable also
Probably.
for one, in the sense that in terms of you actually knowing that you counted your vote. That would be a nice thing. Arguably, some systems people proving with some confidence that the total contains their vote would be nice.
That would be very nice. Yes. And I don't think the integrity and the secret ballot aren't actually conflicting.
Well, that's my point.
Um,
I think the receipt is
We want
kind of
you, the voter, to know that your vote was counted and was counted correctly, but we don't want you to be able to prove to anyone else how you voted.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and so the machine is going to have to enforce all that as well. Well, I'll tell you about some very early developments that really lit up some fire behind this controversy. One of the earliest deployments of DREs on a large scale was the state of Georgia. They moved statewide to the Diebold DREs. It was, I think, the first statewide deployment. Not long after the state of Maryland also deployed, actually from the same vendor, a statewide deployment of DREs. Something interesting happened. Up until this point, as originally mentioned, all the source code had been proprietary. Early in 2003, a source code repository, a tarred up CBS archive of the Diebold source code, leaked onto the internet. It had been stuck on some open FTP site, hadn't been protected, and a group of 4 computer security folks took a look at the code and wrote a paper about it, and the paper was just absolutely scathing. Basically, the paper found that the security in these systems had some elementary mistakes that were extremely embarrassing. And this, I think, probably more than anything, really shone a big spotlight on. Up till then, people had concerns about the code, but didn't have anything concrete to point to. So I'll give you a few examples of some of the attacks they came up with, just to give you a sense of the kinds of criticisms that they made in this paper. The Diebold system works with a voter. As a voter, you have a smart card. When you sign in, you're given this smart card. This smart card is a one-use-only token that proves to the machine that you're entitled to vote once and only once. So when you walk up to the machine, you stick the smart card in the smart card reader. The machine queries the smart card and says, hey, what's your status? Are you an activated smart card? Have you been activated? And if the smart card has been activated, it says responds accordingly. You are then allowed to vote. The DRE then allows you to vote. You cast your ballot, and once the machine has cast your ballot, recorded your vote, it then sends a signal to the smart card saying, please cancel yourself, deactivate yourself so you can't be used to vote a second time. Okay? And the only folks who can reactivate a voter card are an election official. So voters should not be able to do that, shouldn't be able to double vote. All right, so here's kind of just interpret in English what the protocol is.
Wasn't Diebold also identified with the Republican Party?
Okay, this is another part that raised some controversies there. The CEO, so Diebold's a large company. One of their main things they sell is bank ATM machines. And they acquired a voting system vendor. It's a little tiny department somewhere in Diebold. Their CEO made some ill-considered comments in a fundraising letter in Ohio, where they're headquartered. He was one of the fundraisers for the Republican Party, and he made some comments saying, I'm committed to delivering the votes of the state of Ohio to candidate Bush.
Semantic trick.
The only honest guy.
Probably, I'm sure that he regrets making that statement. So here's the protocol in English, just as I described to you. The DRE asks the smart card, are you a valid card? And the smart card says, yep. And then the DRE tells the smart card, after it's recorded a vote, please cancel yourself, and the smart card. So you can guess, so what's the security hole here? I'll show you. If you're a security person, you probably spot this right off the top of your head. There's nothing in that protocol that is used to authenticate that this is a legitimate smart card. The voter could have brought in their own malicious smart card. You can buy these off the shelf, and could have programmed it to, whenever it's asked, is it valid, to just respond, yep, I'm valid. And whenever the DRE asks the smart card to invalidate itself, the smart card will say, okay. But the next time you ask that malicious smart card, is it valid, it'll still say, yep. So what could happen, a voter could walk in with their own smart card, walk up to the machine and vote, as many times as they like until some poll worker gets suspicious that they've been there an awful long time. Embarrassing. Here's another example. Here's the authentication protocol that the machine used to identify election officials. Election officials use a special administrator smart card and have a special PIN number that when they enter in gives them access to extra functionality, things like opening or closing the polls, other operations. So here's the authentication protocol, which is used to make sure this really is an election official that the machine is talking to, not some random voter. The election official sticks a card in, and the DRE asks the smart card, what kind of card are you? And the card says, I'm a special administrator card. And the DRE then asks the card, says, okay, what's the secret PIN that's on your card? And the card tells the machine. And then asks the voter on the touchscreen interface, shows up a screen that says, please type in your PIN. And the official or the voter, whoever's standing there, has to type in the PIN. And if the human types in the correct PIN, then they're given administrative access. So, let's pop the security hole here.
In other words, you just have to match the numbers.
All you have to do is match the numbers. So if you're bringing your own smart card that's been pre-programmed with a PIN that you know, you can stick it in. Your smart card can claim to be an administrative card, can claim to have that PIN that you know, and then you'll be able to type in the matching PIN. So you'll be able to get administrative access even though you're not an authorized election official. Actually, it was worse than I showed here because the standard PIN that many jurisdictions used was 1111.
So do you think it's really possible that these mistakes were made by accident, or were they made to facilitate fraud?
Well, as a security person, I guess I've gotten used to Occam's razor that I'm always reluctant to ascribe to malice what could be mere incompetence. Of course, reading someone's mind is never possible, so it's hard to rule out the possibility that some of these were inserted with malicious intent, but all of these are completely consistent with someone who just doesn't know anything about security, programming a security critical application. With no oversight. All right, so here's Dan Wallach, one of the authors, and a Berkeley grad, standing. I just enjoy this picture because he's standing, testifying before the legislature of the state of Texas in front of a poster that says "Computer, eat my vote." So there's a Berkeley grad. Here's where we can end up. Well, it turns out these problems were not just Diebold problems. In the 2004 election, I'll give you some examples of some failures of other systems. Here's one in North Carolina that lost over 4,000 votes because the machine claimed that would allow voters to come in and vote and record their vote, but didn't actually record the vote because it was out of space and it didn't tell anyone. Just kept accepting votes, which it then threw away. It was embarrassing. They had to hold another election there. Here was a machine error in Ohio. Fortunately, this one was very easy to notice. 600 voters signed in, and we've got over 4,000 votes for one candidate. Obviously, that's wrong. This was very easily detected. It turned out there was some data error in the data transfer. They didn't have a checksum on the data. Here's another bug. This is a fun one from Broward County in Florida. This is the paragraph to read. All right, if you're a computer programmer, when you see a statement like that, you probably get very suspicious. I'm sure you can guess what the explanation is. Here's a long, detailed letter where the vendor basically said, "Oh, sorry, we stored our vote tallies in a 16-bit int. It was assigned int, so when you get up to 32,767, it wraps around." It's supposed to be counting backwards if they have too many votes. All right, so what was the reaction? I mean, the reaction to all this, here's just some examples. This spawned a huge amount of distrust among some communities, and you can see here's some protest votes. Computer ate my vote. Here's people standing out in the freezing cold in Denver, Colorado, protesting. So there's a real problem, right? When we're deploying technology that causes this kind of distrust, that reduces the voter trust in our elections, that's a problem. So looking at this from a technical point of view, probably the biggest challenge here with these machines is the problem of the malicious insider, malicious code problem. When we have a DRE that's recording your votes electronically, where you have no way of observing what that DRE is doing, where you can't see the source code, even if you could see the source code, there's a very difficult problem with malicious logic. So the kind of threat that to be concerned about, it's very hard to defend against, is that an insider, for instance, a programmer at the vendor or someone who's gained access to the source code, could insert some kind of a Trojan horse, some kind of malicious code into the source code for the machine that causes it to operate improperly. For instance, to steal 5% of the votes from one candidate and assign them to another candidate without allowing the voter to tell. So from a technical point of view, this challenge is a very hard one to deal with. Our voting systems have hundreds or millions of lines of source code. It's very hard to know, to go, even if you had access to that source code, to go look at every line of source code and to detect if there was some subtle place in the source code that was causing it to misbehave. So there's, yeah.
I'm sorry, but aren't these things tested for validity by voting officials? Wouldn't you just sort of run a test somehow that there was absolutely zero errors?
There are tests. There is testing that's done. The problem, and testing is pretty good at detecting certain kinds of inadvertent errors, but the problem is when you're dealing with malicious intent, testing gives you very little confidence. From a security point of view, testing is almost useless because if we've got a knowledgeable attacker, the kind of thing they could do is that they could stick in some logic, for instance, that detects when it's being tested, operates perfectly before election day, but only on election day, after it's been running for 4 hours in a real election, does it start to steal some votes.
I see.
And I should say the thing that's really insidious about this is not that I'm suggesting that this has actually happened or that this is happening on a routine basis. The thing that's insidious about the malicious code problem is that I don't have any way, it's very hard to prove that this has not been done. And so when you get skeptical voters who raise this, I think the election's been stolen, I think it's been done by malicious code, it's very frustrating to be able to not provide any counter evidence to refute that kind of an argument.
I guess it's important. Well, I guess I don't understand what this code is doing, since there's so much code. Could one do this with 1,000 lines of code if one really tried?
That's one of the research. That's what I want to talk about a little bit. Is some of the research I'm doing. Yeah, why is it so complicated? I'm not sure why it's so much code. I mean, part of it is that the vendors just have not been thinking about this from a security point of view or from an independent review process.
Yeah, I mean,
so there's no attempt to, for instance, the Diebold machine runs on top of a Windows CE operating system.
Yeah.
Which is unnecessary.
I think you're probably going there. But I mean, it seems like there's some piece of code that needs to be very secure and a lot of code that basically doesn't matter.
Maybe we should get
Right, sorry.
the Berkeley accounting system to write.
I'll leave that one, please.
This is being recorded, David. You might be aware that this is being recorded for the administration, so.
All right, well, so there's two general techniques that we could use to deal with this, to try to detect malicious code and verify its absence. One is that we could try to verify perhaps through exhaustive manual analysis or through formal methods that the software doesn't have any Trojans and will behave as we want. It's free of backdoors. Unfortunately, that's a very hard research problem to do whenever you're working at any kind of scale. It's really only viable for very small amounts of code. It's very expensive. The other option is to try to verify. Don't verify that the software. Don't try to verify in advance that the code will do what you want. after the fact, look at the results of the output of the code, of the software, and check that those results are correct, so that you can be sure the results are correct even if the software is totally bogus. So one of the proposals that's out there has been, for instance, to augment these machines with a voter-verified paper audit trail and to perform some auditing of that. So let me show you first this approach. This is more viable in the short term, and then I'll tell you about some of the research we're doing in this software verification angle. So here's a Diebold machine. This is one that was demonstrated here a couple months ago here in Alameda. It's been augmented, you'll see right down here, it's been augmented with a printer. What this printer does is it prints on a piece of paper your vote selections, and then you, the voter, before you cast your ballot, are given a chance to review what's been printed on that paper tape and to approve or reject it. And if you approve it, you can watch while it prints approved and scrolls into a security canister and is deposited for later counting, so that even if the electronic if this thing is recorded your vote incorrectly electronically, you have no way to verify what the electronic recording was. You can verify what was printed on the paper because, my human unaided eyes can be.
But it's had to be confidential though, right?
Okay, so now there's an issue. What do you count?
Well, the machine could count something else.
You can't.
Print this.
If you just count what's on the electronic records, then there's no point in printing some paper if you're never going to use it.
Exactly.
So now you got to so the paper, in principle, it is there in the case of a dispute or a recount. You could recount the paper, but it's very expensive to recount all of the paper records individually. So this leads to
Sorry, David, did you say that you shouldn't have some proof on how you voted to show it to somebody else later on?
That's right. So this paper is not something that you, the voter, take home with you. It's under a little bit of a glass, and it scrolls by, and you can't ever actually touch it.
Okay, I've got it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not obvious from the picture.
And it's not associated with you personally.
Right. And it does not have your identity on it. It does not have the time.
Okay,
But
thanks.
technically, with new technology, someone with a cell phone camera could take a picture of it and say, "Guess how I voted."
Actually, this is an issue for all voting systems, and I'm not sure quite how to think about it. Even mechanical lever machines, paper ballots, you could be recording this.
Yeah, you have it on the screen anyway.
In principle, you could imagine that the poll workers might be there to supervise this, so that hopefully they'll tell you, no, you're not allowed to do that. But as cell phones get smaller and smaller, it's harder and harder to see.
But of course you could edit the picture on your cell phone. Don't forget to put cell phone picture in Photoshop.
Is there, a more sophisticated way would be that you actually give each voter a cryptographic hash or a homomorphic hash of their vote, and then the agency publishes the entire list of votes, and you look up your vote.
There are schemes for doing that. What's very tricky with the cryptographic schemes is that you have to make sure as a voter that you've been given the right cryptographic hash, even though you don't trust the software to do it for you. And so you have to have some protocol by which, some interactive proof protocol by which you can be convinced that you were given the right
Little calculators, you can do all the arithmetic.
All right, so to make the voter verified paper audit trail useful, which by the way I should mention has been mandated in California now, all new equipment starting as of this year must come with it. So you will see this when you vote this year. And many other states have now started to add a requirement for this. To make this useful, we actually have to look at the paper. We can't just ignore it. And so one of the proposals that's been out there is to use statistical audits. This is a standard technique from the quality control literature. What the paper gives us is that we have paper records that we know the voter has verified, and then we can have some grounds for confidence in, even if the software has gone haywire. But we don't want to count, we don't want to manually inspect all of those paper records because it's so expensive to do. So what you do in an audit, one option is that you can randomly select a fraction of the machines, for instance 1% of the machines, and manually count the paper records that the voter has verified for those 1% sample of machines, and check that the manual counts match the electronic counts exactly. And if in every case, every time you pick a random machine and you recount the paper records, that matches the electronic records that the electronic system came up with, then that gives you some grounds for confidence that the results can't be too far off. to give you some intuition for that. You can make this very quantitative, but it's actually a very simple idea. If more than, let's say, 100 machines are cheating and are misrecording votes, then we stand a pretty good chance to detect that cheating because it's likely that at least one of those machines will be in our sample. And if the machine is in our sample, then we'll detect it, assuming voters have checked their paper records. We'll detect it because the paper record will mismatch the electronic records. So if we sample if we sample a large fraction of machines and no errors are detected in any of those samples, then we can have grounds for confidence that electronic results were correct.
One of the problems in Ohio's 2004 recount was the lack of random selection, or at least the lack of anyone, such as myself, to be able to verify that the selection was random.
That's a problem, and it's not a problem that's not just confined to Ohio. In fact, it turns out to be widespread as far as I can tell. I'll just show you the protocol is, you can think of this as an interactive proof protocol. The election officials publish electronic tallies, and then the verifier who wants to verify those results picks at random a few machines and then asks to manually count those tallies. Now, for this interactive proof protocol to be secure, that random selection has to be truly random. And if we just had one voter who wanted to verify the results, then it would be easy. That voter could pick their own random numbers, but that's not good enough. We want a process that will allow all observers to be able to verify that this was done correctly. So we went to observe the audit process in Alameda County, and we've done some investigation elsewhere. And one of the things that we noticed is this issue is exactly what you brought up, is that the verifiably random drawing of 1% of the 1% sample is crucial. It has to be, that random drawing has to not only be random, but it has to be that observers can verify for themselves that the process was random. And you have to be able to verify for yourself that it was random without trusting any software, because remember, the whole point of this is that we want to provide some confidence to those who So we have a proposal that we've been working with Alameda County officials on for how to do this. It turns out there's many obvious things you could try, but this is more challenging than you might think, to come up with something that's low cost, that's understandable to not just to computer scientists, but to the voting population at large. And so what we're currently thinking about right now is some very low-tech solution with a 10-sided dice. Is a very cheap and understandable source of physical randomness that gives you a way to observe. So when you want to pick a random machine, it's very simple. You toss 3 10-sided dice. It gives you a random 3-digit number, and that allows you to select a machine at random from a list of up to 1,000 machines. If you have 10,000 machines, you have 4.
Why does it need to be random? Why not let the runner-up decide which ones to check?
That would be fine if the only purpose of the audit was to convince the runner-up that they had lost. But it's not clear whether that's adequate because, for instance, we saw in Ohio. I'll give you an example, a concrete example. In Ohio, the Democratic campaign was very reluctant to challenge or request recounts in Ohio because they didn't want to be seen as sore losers. Okay, but there was a fraction of the voting population who was nonetheless extremely skeptical about those results and was very unwilling to accept those results on faith. And so it's not clear. I mean, yes, that's one possibility, but it's not clear that's going to give everyone confidence. Because there's a segment of the population who may not trust the candidate to do this. So we really want to convince everyone. Yeah.
Because like if I don't have an ordering to the dice, I could if I break the station, I know some particular precinct is bad, I can sort of reorder the dice, right? If I C321 or something.
Yeah, so you need to come up with in advance a process so that it'll be uniquely selected. The machine will be uniquely determined from the roll, and you could do that very simply. A 3-colored dice. We bought a red, a white, and a blue one, and you read them off in order: red, white, blue. That's easy.
Or you just label one of them 100, 200, 300 on the side.
So that's a very simple approach. But it does still require paper. It requires storage and transport of paper records, accounting of paper records, so it has some of the logistical difficulties. And it has issues with accessibility because, of course, if you're blind, you can't read what's on that paper, you can't verify it. So we're also looking further to the future. One of the research approaches that we're looking at is whether we can build voting systems that will be possible to verify will work correctly and is free of malicious code. So let me give you a sense of how automation sits in the election today. Today there's an awful lot of software floating around. You as a voter may see a DRE when you go into the polling place if your jurisdiction uses DREs, but what you won't see is before the election there's a whole amount of administration that's done on a ballot programming system to lay out the ballot and do other work. And after the election there's a large back-end canvas system that's used to count and aggregate and accumulate vote results and print reports and so on. And right now, the current architecture is that they're all security critical. Any malicious code anywhere there could steal an election, for instance, or any malicious operator of the tally system, the ballot programming system, could commit voting fraud. It's just too hard to verify that this is free of malicious code, which is a challenge. So the first observation that we made is that it's a very simple thing you can do to take an awful lot of this out of the trusted computing base, to take an awful lot of the software and be such that you do not have to verify the code is correct. For instance, if you want to know that the ballot programming has been done in a correct way, all you need to do is you need to publish the output of this ballot programming system, publish the ballot definition file, the electronic ballot definition file is loaded into the DREs. And if you then inspect before the election to make sure that all the candidates appear and they appear in their correct locations and no candidate has been favored and so on and so forth, then you do not need to know whether the code here is correct, because if you know that the ballot definition file that it output is correct. And likewise, a kind of a dual observation is that if DREs were to publish the set of ballot images, the cast vote records that they recorded electronically, the inputs to, if all of the inputs to this counting software were published, then it wouldn't be necessary for voters, skeptical voters, to trust this system here, because they could, in principle, take those same records, write their own tallying software to recount them, and you could have many independent implementations of the tallying part of the system to check that all of them are giving you the same result.
Would that be per machine or per Alameda County, or per county?
Right now this is done, elections are administered in most states on a county basis.
Yeah.
So each county runs all of this stuff.
So that would be per machine then, you get the published image?
You would need to publish, yeah, you need to publish this per machine. Yeah. But still, it still hasn't helped with the DRE though. We still have an awful lot of code in the DRE. And today that's a lot of code. The Diebold machines, when it was leaked, had about 50,000 lines of source code, not counting the operating system, libraries, other stuff like that. So that's too much to verify will be correct. That's really hard to exhaustively examine the security of all of that. So we're looking at architectures where you can reduce the burden on someone who wants to perform an independent source code review of that system. Suppose that we want experts to be able to review the source code and before the system is certified, verify that this is reasonable. Suppose we want third parties to be able to look at the source code and convince themselves that it doesn't have any backdoors. Well, one observation is that we could reduce the amount of code that such a reviewer would have to examine an awful lot if only we knew that that confirmation screen, that summary screen, and the vote recording process was done correctly. So right now, a lot of the complexity in the DRE is parsing these ballot definitions, presenting a nice graphical user interface, laying out the screen in a pretty way, managing all the buttons using the GUI interface. All that vote selection phase, in principle, we might be able to tolerate any errors or malicious code in there if we knew that the stuff that shows you the summary screen and recorded the ballot was correct in the sense that it would only record a vote if you approved it, and if you do approve it, it will record exactly the same as what it showed you. Because if there was any error in the initial vote selection phase, when you got to the summary screen, you would have a chance to correct that error. And we're working on an implementation of this. In fact, if you implement this idea, you can use multiple hardware devices for isolation to ensure that even if there's any malicious code over here, it cannot tamper with the confirmation code. And our current implementation is able to get the size of the code that you as a reviewer would need to inspect down to about 7,000 lines of code, following exactly. So this is, John, this is very much along the lines that you were proposing.
Okay, so the hardware, are you having running separate processes, or how are you?
Running multiple processors. So the observation we have is that processors have been getting very cheap, right? And so as a way to get very high assurance, low cost isolation between two processes or two applications, one very simple way to do that is to stick them on two different CPUs and to restrict it to a very limited way how they can communicate. We've also been looking at ways to make the user interface more secure. So I suggested that one of the things that the ballot programming system could do is you could publish its output. And we have a further observation, which is all of that user interface work that's currently done on the fly in the DRE on election day. There's no need to do that on election day. In fact, all of that could be done in advance. It could be done in advance by the ballot programming system. And you could have the ballot programming system do all of your graphical layout, come up with a set of bitmap images, one bitmap image per screen that you as a voter would see. And all of that could be aggregated into a pre-rendered ballot, which could then be published in advance. So the pre-rendered ballot would contain pre-rendered bitmap images for the screens and some kind of a flowchart, a finite state automaton that describes the interaction of the machine when you press a button on the screen as it goes to. So we've been working on implementing this, and it turns out that it's possible to take an enormous amount of code in the DRE, shove it outside the DRE into the layout system, into the part of the system that does not need to be trusted. And what you get when you do this is you get effectively an electronic sample ballot, the equivalent of our paper sample ballot, but in an electronic form, which can be published in advance of the election so that anyone can run for themselves, can see for themselves what will be on the ballot, can run for themselves, see what the voting machine, how it will behave on election day, and you can convince yourself that it's as you want it. So maybe I'll just stop there. I think one of the promises of this electronic voting technology, if we can deal with some of the transparency and trust issues, is that this could really help an awful lot with accessibility. So here's a picture of a voter with mobility impairments voting. We could, for the first time, allow a large population of voters who previously haven't been able to vote privately and independently now vote without having to tell anyone how they voted and have some confidence that they're voting correctly. So there's a great research challenge here. It's really exciting. And some of these problems, how to make e-voting secure and trustworthy without use of any paper, they're really hard research problems, but I think they're really worth exploring.
That was a great talk. Just a couple of questions from the floor.
David. Henry.
That's great stuff. I think it's wonderful.
Can I ask a quick question? In a particular county, I don't know how many DRE machines there are, but is there any sort of attempt to cross-correlate to see if there's an outlying machine or an outlying system? Yeah, an outlying machine. Is there anything done like that?
That's a great question. Normally, right now, I'm not aware of any systematic attempt to do that. There's some results are often reported, and sometimes people go look at them and will go find some surprising anomalies. Henry's done.
That's what we did in 2000 in Palm Beach County.
I see.
We wrote a paper on the butterfly. Oh, actually, I was involved in the court case down there. I flew down to, I guess, the Saturday after the election.
Where?
Palm Beach County, Florida, the butterfly ballot case. And what we did is we did outlier analysis, basically, robust estimation techniques, looking for whether or not the vote for Buchanan in Palm Beach County was an outlier in terms of all counties in the United States, and then also comparing absentee ballots with the ballots on election day and finding that there were distinct differences.
I see.
And the result of that is pretty clear. I mean, you said we may have made a mistake. I'm absolutely certain if you read our paper, you will be convinced 2,000 people at least voted for Pat Buchanan who meant to vote for Al Gore.
Wow.
Which, by the way, you may remember the difference was 537 votes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So Al Gore won the election in Florida in 2000 if there had not been mistakes like that. And there's other mistakes, too, I could tell you about. But we have actually proposed that there should be nationwide efforts to get all these data together and do exactly the kinds of things we propose.
These kind of cross correlations.
Yeah, basically what you can do is you can take historical voting data, you can predict what you'd expect to
Yeah,
find,
yeah,
you can
right.
look for outliers, it's using robust estimation.
Yeah.
It's a complicated statistical problem, but it's doable. And with modern computing technology, you can run through all the data pretty quickly and,
Right.
and do some pretty complicated switches of the space.
So Henry, just
Fine
to
problem.
give me an idea, in Alameda County, when we vote, are there 2,000 DREs altogether, or 5,000?
There's about 4 or 5 per precinct. There's about 500 people per precinct. There's, I don't know how many voters. Now
Something
I
like
get
800
lost. How many
precincts.
voters in Alameda County? How many precincts do you think?
There's something like 800 precincts that have a polling place.
Okay, so there's probably 2,000 or 3,000.
So 2,000 to 3,000, okay. I was just, yeah. And you could do it.
Well,
and
yeah,
your
exactly.
statistics
That's,
would be
we
good
have
to-
urged that. I mean, I love the idea of publishing the ballot images. Give me the ballot images, you can do a lot of interesting things statistically. You start looking for odd patterns.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's always some way somebody might be able to find a way to fool you, but it'd get pretty hard actually if you had the ballot images, because you
Yeah.
could look inside a ballot. That's one thing we did with the Buchanan vote. We found lots of ballots where somebody voted all Democratic,
Right.
and then they voted for Pat Buchanan.
Yeah.
And then we compared the absentee votes where people who voted all Democratic almost always voted Al Gore, but not on election day. So what happened?
Yeah,
It's pretty clear that what happened is the election day ballot was messed up by this bad design.
Wow. John?
So, the core code seems good, but I guess I'm still wondering about this runtime. I guess, is there still a Windows CE or some operating system? And is there, is the Python compiled, or is it a virtual machine?
So there's 2 questions there. One is, what have we done on the prototype? On our prototype, we haven't addressed this at all. I mean, we're just getting
The
started.
meta question is, what do you think about the runtime? Is the idea to eliminate anything else?
I think that we can do a lot better than what we've got now. We don't need a commodity operating system, for instance. We don't need general purpose libraries on there. There are some challenges, though. You're probably still going to be using a compiler or interpreter of some form. You're going to still be using a hardware, maybe it's a chip from Intel or something like that.
Right.
And so there may still be questions asked about how do you know that compiler is working correctly? How do you know that chip is working correctly?
Yeah,
I don't have good answers to this.
Yeah, I mean, there's an infinite, all of the hardware, not just the chip, every wire, right? But the chip, I think we have, that's somewhat massive, doing anything at a chip level. But compilers, I worry a bit about Python actually more than others. I mean, C at least you could probably choose 10, 20, a lot of different compilers.
I don't think Python probably isn't what you would use for a real deployment. This is a rapid prototype.
But I guess it's sort of similar to some of the hardware issues where they propose using this dangerous hardware with compilers. You could try it, you could at least try different compilers and make sure it's behaved the same as far as you can tell. I guess. In fact, you could have the process so cheap. Why not just run several different compiled versions of the same code in the box and see if they do the same thing?
Yeah, that's plausible. That's been suggested. There's a little bit of subtlety there, which is that when they disagree, it's not obvious what to do.
Right.
You can detect. It'd be nice to know,
Yeah.
but recovering from that you may not be able to do on the fly. So yeah, it's a good idea.
Aaron, do you want to have the last question?
Just as far as the Florida thing goes, do you know if, is there any evidence or anything? I mean, it's obvious that ballot was a poor design, but was it actually designed by someone on purpose?
A Democratic county registrar,
So it was just a bad design.
just incompetent,
Just there.
just incompetent.
Shall we do a wonderful round of applause? That was a great talk. And at a very mundane level,